Welcome to the Assembling Inclusion podcast. On this show, we feature different programs, individuals, and initiatives focused on being more inclusive of individual needs. We invite you to learn right alongside us. If you want some additional resources or access to our courses, please visit our website or follow us on social media. But for right now, let's get right to the episode. What comes to mind when you think about sensory needs? You might think about the obvious five senses or the feeling of being calm and at peace. Well, today we're talking all about Snoezelen, a company dedicated to building multisensory environments that promote relaxation, stimulation, and development. Chris Hastings is our guest for today, and we talk all about how Snoezelen creates these incredible spaces all over the world, including in special education classrooms, schools, therapy centers, and in adult facilities. These spaces allow for people to feel relaxed as soon as they enter the room, which has shown to be beneficial for a variety of different people. With the rise in interest in creating calming corners and sensory spaces, everyone needs to take a listen to the information from Chris in this episode. So let's dive right in. Hello, and welcome back to the Assembly Inclusion podcast. Today, we are joined by Chris Hastings, and we're going to be talking all about Snoezelen, which helps to design and create multisensory environments that fill a variety of purposes across a variety of different fields. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic today. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
So I know that Snoezelen has been around for a number of years. I think I read back on the website that the idea of development even started being kicked around in like the 70s. But what was the inspiration for getting started in the field of creating these multisensory spaces?
So in particular, Snoezelen came to North America on the back of a couple of very nice people that I've got the chance to meet who had children that did have some profound neurodiversity issues. And so it was a passion project for them to bring it across from Europe, where it had become a very popular therapy. They helped bring it back across and acquired the trademark and the legal ability to bring Snoezelen over to North America. And so they opened their first room here in Canada in 1992 at Hull and Bloorview Children's Hospital, and also in LifeSpire, which is a clinic in New York City. So they brought that over, and it really was a passion project for them with their own children, that they wanted to provide an alternative therapy solution to what was available at the time.
There are so many ways these spaces can be used, and I want to make sure I link some examples of them in the show notes so people can take a look, because they're very impressive looking. I was just looking at some of the designs and the finished products. They are really detailed. So I was just curious. Obviously, a lot of time and effort goes into the creation of these rooms. What does that process look like? Because not every room looks the same. Not every purpose is the same. So how does that process work?
It's a really tricky one. And, the beauty of working in this market with the individuals that we serve is that you learn very quickly working with individuals that have special needs. One size fits all applies nowhere, right? And that same philosophy does apply to the rooms, because every facility is going to have a different space. They're going to have a different user population, and you really have to do it hand in hand with the people who are going to be caring for the individuals. So we have a process we've developed over 20 years, and we've made mistakes along the way. And so we like to think that we've got to the best version of that, where most people that if they come in, they are talking with one of our Snoezelen sales consultants, and they really are a sensory expert at designing these rooms around making sure that people have exactly what they need for whatever the needs are. So if we're designing something for a senior center in a memory care wing that specializes in Alzheimer's and dementia, that's going to be significantly different than if we're designing a room that's going to be for early intervention or kids that are, in the 3 to 6 age range. So we really do try to tailor the experience to be very unique to the end user. And we do that by going through a very exhaustive consultative survey and a list of questions. We also then go through a design process where we have some designers, and we have some really fantastic designers who have been putting these rooms together for like 20 years. So they really know how to put things together. So it's not only good for the end user, it's really good for the staff too. And it's an ease to use, and it's enjoyable for them, which means the end user gets to enjoy it more because everybody likes being in that space. And I'll say that for myself, I've had a very unique career path in that I have been the salesperson. I also spent a few years installing the rooms. So I got a lot of time actually being in the space and seeing it go from a blank slate, a blank canvas, if you will, to this fully finished, immersive experience. You've never been in one until you've been in one, and you can feel what kind of a calming experience it is.
I can imagine those before and afters have to be amazing to see.
I'll make sure I send you, so you can post it on your social, a time-lapse video we recorded in a facility that we put together in the Dominican Republic. It was a passion project with the first lady at the time who worked with kids with special needs. So she designed a bunch of centers. We got the contract to install these rooms, and we set up a camera in the corner, and over 2 days put this room together. And watching it go from nothing to this amazing experience is really neat.
Oh, that is awesome. Definitely send that, because I want to put that in the show notes and on social so everybody could take a look, because that's really incredible. So I know that with multisensory, the 5 senses are a huge component of what you are doing within the design process. And I noticed it goes beyond the traditional 5 senses everybody's come to know. I think there's the 2 extras as well. But what types of features are typically added to stimulate those senses?
It's really interesting. Traditionally we understand that there's 5 senses. We would argue that there's sometimes up to 8 senses that you could really talk about. So everybody knows vision, touch, hearing, smell, taste. There's also vestibular, proprioception. And then we also are big advocates of interoception too, how the human body feels on the inside and what that means to us. So we do try as much as possible. Of course, you have to be unique to each user need. Some places don't like you bringing in aromatherapy for the sense of smell, or they don't like bringing in foods to play with taste. So those are some things that you have to be sensitive with. But generally speaking, a lot of the products that we put into these rooms, they're designed with the purpose that each product itself can be multisensory. So a great example of that is the bubble tube. It's immediate. As soon as you think of a multisensory environment, you think of a bubble tube. Well, you've obviously have the lights that are coming up through the column of water. You have the bubbles that you can use visually for tracking, but there's also a hum to the pump. So as you put your hand up against the side, you do get that little bit of vibration input. And of course, that slow white noise hum at the bottom is also a very calming sound that you can hear. So a lot of our products are designed with that in mind, that each individual product can have a bunch of different purposes.
That's really cool how there's multi-purposes to each function. I was looking at the tubes online, and they're really cool looking. They're really bright and colorful, and I could have seen my students being really calmed by experiencing that.
It's one of the core features we have to have in every room. It's the iconic image you think about when you think about those spaces, but there's so many amazing things that you can do with those tubes that have great outcomes for kids. We often talk about creating the power of controlling your environment, which is one of the really core principles to Snoezelen, is giving somebody control over their own environment, because for a lot of these individuals, it's not something they have in their day-to-day lives. They have to follow somebody else's schedule, and we're going to do these activities today. So the idea of Snoezelen is to be a very self-guided process. And there's some really interesting things that you can do with some of our products that do give them that control over the environment. So an example would be something like, we have an 8-button switch that's got 8 numbers on it, 8 colors on it. And as they press each button, it changes the color of all the equipment in the room. So now they have that power that to create that cause-effect relationship. A lot of our technologies are meant to interact with each other. We have some products like the Sensory Magic, which is software that goes on a computer, but it projects an image onto the wall. It also has sound, obviously, that comes out, but that can be controlled through that same 8-button controller. So if, they're going through playlist 1 to 8 and they really love number 2, they can keep going back to number 2 if that's what's bringing them joy in the moment. They have that power over their environment, and giving them that is a really neat effect to see.
Oh yeah, that's really great, because from the education perspective, so often you're right, they're on a set schedule. They don't really get much decision-making process in their day. So the fact that they can go into that room and decide what they want to focus on and what they want to use without the restrictions of having someone say, like, you have to do this and then this and then this, that has to be really empowering for the students.
And the theory behind Snoezelen in practice is that it's a very self-guided activity. So we understand that, as carers, a lot of people have things that they need to get, a mandate, or, we need to get this person to identify these items, or we're trying to work on numbers today, or we're trying to work on something else. Snoezelen itself can be just a leisure activity, a chance to kind of decompress from a lot of that. And we find a lot of individuals go into these spaces and let them be self-guided, let them go into the room and see what they gravitate towards, because they'll seek out what they really need, right? Do I need that calming of being in the bubble tube, or do I want to go over to that wall where there's some tactile things that I can play with? Or do I want to just go over here in this corner and listen to the music because it sounds really nice and comfy on this chair? So we do find if you start with that and then let them ease into the space, it unlocks a lot of possibilities that then later on you can get to some of those outcomes that you're trying to get. You can absolutely get there once somebody's really calm in that space, and it can absolutely unlock a lot of potential in that individual.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it does. I know that some students can get overstimulated when there's too much going on. So is there a way to, I don't want to say like turn on and turn off, but are they able to just manipulate one thing at a time without necessarily being distracted by other things that might be present in the room?
It really is that simple, that it is turning stuff on, turning stuff off. So when we do installations of the room, obviously we work with people in the budget that they have, but we very often recommend some electrical work or some electrical solutions that we can do. And a lot of it, thank goodness, in the last couple of years has gotten a lot easier with how easy smart technology has become, where smart plugs and automation. So you can have devices that can power off immediate things. One of the things I used to do when I used to install, when I loved doing that big reveal where I would bring in the occupational therapist who had, seen this happen. And it was a neat thing. I did it every week. So it got a little old for me in that way. But for them, this is a passion project. And I would have everything turned on. They'd walk into that room and it would be stunning, knock their socks off. And the first thing I would tell them, I said, never do what I just did. Never, ever do. So make sure if you're bringing individuals into the space in the first time, start small, 1 or 2 things, because obviously with somebody that has sensory processing disorder, if you bring somebody into a room with every light and every sound on, it can be overstimulating. And then you can have a panic and you can have a fear of going into that space, and you've created a barrier. So we typically do recommend start small, build, find out what that person's threshold is, find out what they engage with. And sometimes a session that can last half an hour and they might interact with one thing in the room. I do try to impart, trust your instincts, trust what you know about this individual, and start where you think they're going to enjoy themselves. And you can always expand from there.
I think that's solid advice, especially like in a school-based setting. I think that makes sense to start off with one maybe and then work your way through it, or depending on the student, that what they could handle at a given point in time.
And that's really what I tried to impart with people. They would expect me to be the expert. I say, listen, I know the product really well. I know how to operate it, but I don't know your people. I don't know the people that you're working with every day. You do. So trust yourself, trust your own instincts, trust what your experience has been with this individual, because that's going to benefit them way more than any advice I'm going to give you.
That makes sense. You've mentioned quite a few different products that are typically in the rooms. What do you consider to be, I know you had mentioned the bubble tubes, but what do you consider to be the most popular choices? I know they're all unique and they're all different. Everybody has their own needs, but what seem to be the most popular ones that people gravitate toward?
So a couple of years ago, one of the things we realized, and this is going to be very lame because it's from a marketing perspective, but we had a product like the Sensory Magic System, which on its own does nothing. It's a computer with a projector and sound, but you pair it up with bubble tubes and fiber optic light sprays and a couple of other products, and all of a sudden it's a full immersive experience, and it's a much better thing. So most of our rooms typically start with what we created called the Sensory Magic Starter Package, and that includes the computer itself. It includes a bubble tube base, 2 mirrors that usually go around a bubble tube. That's a cost-saving venture on us. If you put 2 mirrors in the corner and you put a tube in the middle, now you have 4 bubble tubes, right? It's just a light play trick, but it saves you some money and it gets you the bigger effect. Things like a color wall washer, which is just a light bar that can make a plain wall fully illuminated, full of the color that you've selected. So it just reinforces and enhances that visual aspect that you're going to get from that. The 8-button controller that gives the user control over their environment is included in that kit. And then usually the other thing that almost every room has is the classic, it's a solar projector. So it's got the projector with the rotating discs, and you can swap out to like 50 different images or patterns or liquid gels if you're just looking for something a little more abstract, and you can really tailor it to whatever the user needs or whatever they're interested in. Those are the core products that you would typically find in almost every Snoezelen room that we design.
A lot of choice and customization within those options, that makes sense that those are probably the most popular choices from people.
Absolutely. And then there's dozens of other products that typically go in there. We have a wide selection of wall panels that provide huge visual interactivity that are very, very popular. Stuff like the Infinity panel, which uses two-way mirrors to create that effect that it looks like it goes 20 feet deep in the wall that you're looking at with the light. So those are typically some of the most popular products that we find in a lot of our rooms.
And that can really work in any kind of space too, which is nice. Space is so limited sometimes, like that really does, make it seem like it's a more expansive space than it is.
It does. And the other probably popular one that we have is the mobile Snoezelen solution, because some places can't create a fixed space. It's just not possible. So we do have some mobile units that we call them Snoezelen carts, where they will have a bubble tube and fiber optics, and you can fit a couple other sensory items onto the cart, and you can go room to room. So you can go to a classroom, or in a seniors facility, you can maybe go to a room where a user isn't able to leave that space. You don't have the physical ability to do that. You can bring the experience to them.
Oh, that's a really great solution for when there's not a physical space present.
Yep.
So I know that these spaces were obviously well documented and well researched in terms of how they benefit different individuals. I mean, we come at it from the disability angle on this show all the time. So like I would notice that it's good for challenging behaviors students may be experiencing, or individuals in general, students with autism and learning disabilities. So how have these spaces been used in the past to kind of support individuals who may have a disability?
Although it started with individuals with profound effects, what we've now moved on to is kind of broadening our horizons on who might get support out of a Snoezelen room. So obviously we see it a lot in schools, but we've also gone with people with mental health problems, people living with chronic pain, individuals with autism, and obviously seniors, dementia, and Alzheimer care has been a big area that we've found a lot of people gravitating towards, especially, in this day and age where we're looking for non-pharmaceutical alternatives to help people manage chronic pain or manage other things that they might be going through. It can be a very soothing experience. So those are kind of the variety of individuals that typically are experiencing Snoezelen.
I can see how that helps a wide variety of people. I think from the perspective from a teacher, I think about it would have been such a great space for my students who may be experiencing something like a meltdown. It would be a good place for them to go into to kind of decompress and to calm down and relax.
It's often used for teachers or individuals who see that coming, and you go, okay, I'm seeing the signs here. If we're at 10 steps to a full meltdown, I'm at 7. Okay, before we get there, why don't you go and spend some time in here, recuperate, kind of restore yourself, get yourself back to your own level, and we'll try again at whatever activity that we were working towards.
That's a great way to use it. I would have loved that. That would have been awesome to have. I did want to ask, I'm big on the research. There were a couple of different studies that I had read about how Snoezelen has been used in a positive way and the positive impact it's had. So I was just curious, what have been some of the biggest research outcomes, do you think, from people who have researched the use of Snoezelen?
It is one of those things that's very difficult to quantify. And I'm sure you also understand, as working in this field, somebody once told me when I first started with this company that, if you've met one person with special needs, you've met one person with special needs.
Yes.
Because from individual to individual, it varies, which doesn't very much help when you're trying to do academic studies where you're trying to get this really big pool of data and look at it. So it is one of those things that's interesting from the academic research. A lot of people have done academic studies, and we do have on our snoezelen.info page a ton of research articles and academic papers that have been done. A lot of the data is inconclusive in a lot of cases because it's really hard to find those big data points that you're looking at when you're looking at individuals that have wildly different needs. What we do see a lot of is a lot of anecdotal research of individuals that have maybe reduced aggression coming out of going into a Snoezelen versus a control group that maybe wasn't getting that program. We have seen in some seniors a reduction in the need for medication in some cases for individuals that are using those. So those are kind of some of the positive things that we have seen come out of some of the studies, but a lot of them do come to that end conclusion of we don't really know, but people seem to enjoy it. That kind of is what the end usually draws to.
And I do always appreciate the anecdotal notes with research too. I mean, it is a difficult thing to quantify. I read the aggression study specifically and the self-injury one. And I was like, even the fact that the
participants, I know it's only a handful of participants because it's a smaller scale study, showed reduced aggression. I was like, well, that's a positive. You may not have 400 people using it and studied, but it's positive that the couple that were using it did.
And I mean, to those individuals and those people who are caring for those individuals, that reduction in aggressive behavior is a huge boost to them. I know, like you said, you spent time with people who have those aggressive behaviors, and anytime you can reduce, that's a win.
And like you said, it's a medical solution to some of these issues. Like, it's just calming and relaxing. And so it's always a good option to try. I wanted to talk about the learning and development side specifically. I had noticed that the website did say that the rooms could be used as a learning and development tool. So how could the room be used in that way? You mentioned cause and effect before with one of the tools specifically, but what other ways?
We do try to build out into a lot of the products and the technologies that we've put into these rooms, tools that people can use to drive learning outcomes. So one of my favorite examples of that, we just did a complete overhaul on all the content that's in the Sensory Magic library. So Sensory Magic, once again, is a software that goes onto a computer, and it links images with sound, and it also coordinates to all the colors in the product, stuff like the bubble tubes or on the fiber optics. So what we did with it was overhaul it to have each of those 8 buttons on those controllers can go to different things. So it could be numbers. It could be numbers in a different language. It could be colors that are on the screen. It could be colors on the screen in a different language. It could be different musical pieces or different musical notes so they can use it to play their own songs, which is kind of neat. So it comes with a little song kit. So if you want to know how to use that controller to play Mary Had a Little Lamb, it can do that. And obviously on that, yes, you're working on musical skills, but you're also working on hand-eye coordination. You're working on progressions and patterns, which is a basic skill for math as well. So all of those things can be used by the individuals to kind of get at those learning outcomes. We're also seeing a lot of times people taking individual components of a Snoezelen space and maybe including those in a classroom. We have had Snoezelen Corner in a special needs classroom or special education classroom where they can go over and do a couple of things over in this area because they find that unlocks something for that individual student. So we do have them both in learning environments, but there's also learning you can do in a dedicated Snoezelen room as well too.
It's great that there's those 2 options. Anytime there's flexibility in education, it always helps out. So that's nice that you can have dedicated space. You can bring some of the space to you. That's really powerful. So from your experiences, what do you think have been the biggest benefits for individuals who are using a Snoezelen multisensory space?
So the greatest benefits they have is just improving a general quality of life. That's really what a Snoezelen space is about. Whether, we want to talk about fancy things like outcomes and learning opportunities and things like that. The number one thing is you have individuals who have a lot of difficulty in their life and a lot of challenges that they have to do on a daily basis. And a lot's asked of them usually to try to get better at something, try to improve something by that infinite little bit of whatever it is, the goal that you're trying to do. And having that space is going to allow people just to relax and have something where nothing is really expected of them. And that's such a powerful thing to think about. Space and a time when nothing is expected of me, and I can just kind of relax and get in touch with myself and whatever my immediate sensory needs are. And that was really the idea behind Snoezelen, and the idea that we wanted to help bring to people is an experience that's just about leisure, enjoy yourself, have some comfort, have some time where there are no expectations, and you can kind of recenter yourself and just connect with you.
I love that so much, because just in general with individuals, there's so much pressure. It was always like, let's get your academic goals done. Let's track your progress. Let's see what you're doing. Let's go. Let's keep up with the curriculum. And it's a lot. So I like the fact that the whole goal is to build a space that it's just like, and you can just relax and take the time to recharge and not focus on the learning expectations for a second and just feel calm.
It's one of the most unique experiences you can really have. I've had some remarkable meetings with individuals in spaces. I've seen some very interesting and amazing things. One of my favorite experiences I ever had with Snoezelen was we set up a room at the Autism Society of America, but they asked us to set up a room at the conference because about 40% of the people that attend the conference were on the spectrum. So I set up the room and I got to stand outside. And one of the most amazing things was watching people, whether they were neurotypical or they were neurodiverse, as soon as they came into that space, the voices all lowered. I didn't ask them to do it. They just naturally did it. And there was a natural calm to it. I watched people come in and they would sit there and just eat their lunch if they had to in there. They would take 20 minutes away from being in a session or walking a trade show floor, and they wanted it to be in there just to relax for a few minutes and calm down. And listening to the change in their voice, their change in their attitudes about the day. It didn't matter who the person was. When they were in that Snoezelen environment, they immediately had that feeling of calm all over them.
That is really incredible. And I'm sure that is probably the consensus for everybody who walks into their Snoezelen set space. I'm sure there is a feeling of just calm and relaxation that goes along with it. And I just want to thank you so much, Chris, for telling us all about Snoezelen and the multisensory experiences that are created within these spaces. I really appreciate you sharing all your work with us.
I appreciate you giving me the time to come on and talk with you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Assembling Inclusion podcast. I hope the information in this episode taught you something new, gave you a new idea, or showcased a new perspective. If you liked the episode, feel free to leave us a review or comment. If you have a recommendation for an individual or an organization who would make a great guest, you can message us on Twitter or Instagram, or send us an email at assemblinginclusion@gmail.com. See you next time.